Entering my boss's office on that Tuesday morning, a routine I'd followed countless times, I found her perched on his desk. Then Violet, his wife, erupted in a scream about 10 minutes later, not because of my actions, but due to the false claims she was about to make against me. The accusation emerged rapidly, swiftly followed by a fabricated story. From that moment, my phone became a relentless harbinger of trouble, ringing 56 times in a single day. That was the turning point, the instant everything irrevocably shifted. For more tales of betrayal, remember to like and subscribe, and share your city or country in the comments below. My name is Adrian. I served as a Navy SEAL for 12 years. In that demanding world, you learn profound discipline, how to maintain composure when chaos erupts around you, how to navigate turmoil with measured breathing, how to maintain clarity of thought when your instincts scream panic. Yet none of that rigorous training prepared me for the ordeal Violet was about to unleash. I was an employee of her husband, Dominic, a highly successful real estate developer. He embodied a blend of inherited wealth and contemporary influence, the quintessential mover and shaker in our city. I began as his executive assistant 5 years prior, not out of financial necessity. My military service had secured my retirement, but because I craved structure, purpose, a meaningful occupation beyond personal concerns. Dominic was the sort of employer who valued discipline. He acknowledged my military background without exploiting it. We shared an unspoken agreement. I performed my duties diligently and expertly, and in return, he allowed me autonomy. That was all I desired. His wife, Violet, however, was an entirely different character. She also hailed from affluence, a lineage of old money and even older expectations. Her beauty possessed an unnerving quality, the kind that came with sharp edges. I consistently felt uneasy in her presence. There was an unsettling aura about her, an analytical gaze that suggested she was perpetually strategizing. Nevertheless, I maintained my professionalism, a cornerstone of my training. That Tuesday morning, I arrived at Dominic's office building precisely at 7:30 a.m. As usual, he was already immersed in meetings. I proceeded to his private office on the top floor to organize his schedule and prepare necessary files. The morning sun streamed through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a pristine glow over the tranquil cityscape below. I was at his desk when the elevator doors chimed open and Violet entered. She was clad in a white sundress, her hair flowing freely despite the early hour. She appeared disheveled, as if she hadn't slept. For a fleeting moment, I suspected an emergency, perhaps a problem involving Dominic, which was my initial assumption. "Good morning, Violet. Is everything all right?" I inquired, rising and maintaining a respectful distance. She offered no reply, instead gliding past me to perch on the edge of Dominic's desk, not in his chair, but directly on the desk itself, her legs elegantly crossed. Her eyes fixed on me with that familiar, calculating expression. "Adrian, you've been working for my husband for quite some time now," she stated slowly. 5 years, I answered, already feeling my discomfort escalating. This conversation felt anything but normal. "Is there something you need?" She offered a smile, but it wasn't genuine. It was a weaponized gesture. "I need you to grasp something important. My husband places a great deal of trust in you, perhaps too much." She rose and advanced closer. I instinctively recoiled. "And I suspect you might be exploiting that trust." My chest tightened. I recognized the trajectory of this conversation. I'd heard similar stories, but they never felt real until they became real. "Violet, I believe you should know—" "You listen," she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp and infused with anger. "I know what your intentions are. I've observed your glances, your contrivances to be near when Dominic is at work, and I am no longer willing to feign ignorance." I had never looked at her in that way. I had barely been alone with her in my 5 years of employment with her husband, but I understood then that this wasn't about truth. This was about something entirely different. And the instant I grasped that, the moment I comprehended what was about to unfold, something shifted within me. Fear. Not for myself, but for what was to come. "I think you should leave my husband's office," I stated quietly, maintaining a professional calm even as my mind raced 3 steps ahead. She emitted a chilling laugh, a sound that reverberated off the glass walls. "You believe I'm leaving?" "No, Adrian, I'm staying right here. I'm going to scream. I'm going to scream so loudly that Dominic will hear me from the conference room 3 floors below. And I'm going to tell him precisely what you just did to me, what you just tried to do." My hands grew cold. Every lesson learned in combat, every technique for remaining composed in peril, surged through me. I remained motionless. I remained silent. I simply watched her. She drew a breath, preparing herself like an actress about to hit her mark. Then she screamed. It wasn't a cry of fear, but an outburst of controlled fury, practiced and calculated, the kind of scream designed to summon an audience. "Stop! Please, stop!" She began tearing at her own dress and raking her nails across her arms, creating visible scratches. My stomach plummeted. I realized I was in the most precarious position imaginable, alone with her in the early morning without any witnesses. Each passing second intensified my appearance of culpability. "Violet, stop. There are cameras." "Shut up. You did this. You did this to me!" She propelled herself against the wall, striking it with enough force to bruise her own shoulder. I witnessed it all, utterly powerless to intervene. Any movement I made would inevitably be misconstrued as violence. It was then that the office doors burst open. Security personnel entered first, followed by Dominic and then other employees. Violet lay on the floor, weeping, her trembling hand pointing at me. Her dress was torn, her arms bore red marks. Her narrative was already complete, and I was cast as the villain in every iteration. "She's lying," I declared, my voice steady, trained, but no one was listening anymore. Dominic's face had drained of color. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if 5 years of accumulated trust had evaporated in the brief span it took for Violet to scream. "Get him out of here," Dominic instructed security, his voice hollow. As they escorted me away, my phone began to ring. One call, then another, then many more. By the time I reached my car in the parking garage, I had 16 missed calls. An hour later, the count rose to 42. By the end of the day, it was 56. I ignored every single call, understanding the inevitable onslaught that awaited me, the police, the lawyers, the merciless court of public opinion. Everything I had painstakingly built, my reputation, my tranquil existence, my personal dignity, was about to be shattered by a single falsehood. The most agonizing aspect was my complete bewilderment as to why she had done it. Not yet, anyway. By 3 p.m. that same day, 2 police officers were waiting outside my apartment. I hadn't even reached my front door when I spotted them. They were young, professional, but their eyes conveyed a clear message. They already believed her. "Adrian Cole?" one asked, despite knowing full well who I was. "Yes," I replied. "We need you to come with us. We have a report of sexual assault filed against you this morning." Sexual assault? The words hung in the air, a poisonous gas. I offered no resistance, no argument. I simply accompanied them. That's what training teaches you. Don't exacerbate the situation. Don't give them a reason to fear you. But the truth was, they were already afraid, and fearful individuals often make dangerous choices. The interrogation room at the precinct was precisely as one would expect: gray walls, a metal table, and a 2-way mirror. 2 detectives sat opposite me. I hadn't yet called a lawyer, believing that a simple explanation of events would suffice. I thought the truth would matter. I was mistaken. Detective Harper, an older woman, perhaps in her 50s, possessed the weary expression of someone who had heard 1,000 stories and credited none of them. Detective Colin, younger and aggressively confident, carried the air of a cop who believed the case was already closed. "So, you're asserting," Harper began, leaning back in her chair, "that you did not make any physical contact with Violet Ashford this morning?" "I did not," I responded. "She entered the office, we exchanged approximately 30 seconds of conversation, then she assaulted herself," Colin interjected, his voice sharp. "She tore her own dress, scratched her own arms." "Yes," I affirmed calmly, "because she needed it to appear convincing." "Why would she do that?" Harper inquired, her gaze fixed on the folder before her containing Violet's statement, her injuries, and her account. "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly. And that was the terrifying truth. I had no clue why she had decided to ruin me, but I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't done what she claimed. Colin let out a short, sharp laugh that tightened my jaw. "We have her testimony, we have photographs of her injuries, we have security footage showing you alone with her in that office. We have multiple witnesses who heard her screaming for you to stop." He recited from a list as if ordering from a menu. "And we have a victim who is terrified of you. So forgive me if your word doesn't carry the same weight as all of that." The interrogation extended for 4 hours, characterized by the same questions framed from different angles. Where were you? What were you doing? Had you ever been alone with her before? Did you ever comment on her appearance? Did anyone ever suggest you seemed interested in her? By the end, they had twisted every detail, manipulating neutral facts into a confession I never made. My military background became combat training used for intimidation. My professionalism was reinterpreted as calculated behavior designed to conceal the truth. My 5 years of loyalty to Dominic were reframed as grooming the family for an opportunity. It was then that I finally requested a lawyer. The public defender assigned to me was named Preston. He was an older man, visibly fatigued, as if he had already lost 1,000 cases and was bracing himself for another defeat. He met with me in a private room for perhaps 20 minutes. "Here's the issue," Preston began, not quite looking at me. "It's her word against yours, and she has injuries. She has witnesses. She has a family fully supporting her story." He paused. "You, on the other hand, have a military record that includes combat training and 0 civilian witnesses." "There's security footage," I countered. "The cameras will show—" "The cameras show the two of you alone in an office," he interrupted. "They don't show what transpired between you. They don't show her self-inflicting injuries. All they show is a tape with just you and her," Preston began, his voice flat. "And when a jury views that tape, they'll perceive precisely what she intends for them to see." A profound sense of disillusionment washed over me then. It wasn't my spirit or my mind that fractured, but a fundamental tenet of my understanding of justice. For 12 years, I had dedicated myself to a system premised on fairness, and now that very system seemed poised to unequivocally validate her narrative. "What course of action do we take?" I inquired, the words barely a whisper. "We await," he responded. "We diligently collect evidence. We meticulously search for inconsistencies in her account, and we hope with every fiber of our being that some fortunate turn of events favors us." Preston then neatly closed his folder. "Until then, you are released on your own recognizance. Refrain from contacting any witnesses. Do not communicate with the alleged victim, and crucially, under no circumstances, discuss this case with anyone." That evening, I was granted my release. By the stroke of midnight, news vans had descended upon my apartment building, surrounding it entirely. Somehow, the story had already found its way into the media, and it wasn't framed as "man accused of assault." Instead, the headline blared, "Navy SEAL accused of raping boss's wife." The Navy SEAL designation, I surmised, was intended to amplify the shock value, implying that my training inherently rendered me more dangerous, or that my military service somehow transformed me into a predator. My phone ceaselessly vibrated with incoming notifications. Messages poured in, a torrent of digital communication. Some were from friends who, by their immediate reactions, clearly believed in my guilt. Others arrived from mere acquaintances, now suddenly feigning concern for Violet's welfare. Interspersed among these were outright threats, chilling promises of retribution should I ever be encountered on the streets. I silenced my phone and remained in the oppressive darkness of my apartment. It was then that a stark realization dawned upon me. Violet's scheme was meticulously planned. Every minute detail had been orchestrated. The theatrically torn dress, the strategically placed scratches, the fabricated screams, all were part of a calculated performance. This singular truth led to an inescapable conclusion. Her actions weren't driven by hatred for me. Rather, she desperately needed something from me. Or, more precisely, she needed me to be removed from the equation. The baffling question lingered. Why? That night offered no answers, only a multitude of questions, and the phantom echo of 56 missed calls that resounded in my mind like an unshakable ghost. By the following morning, 3 additional women had come forward, each claiming I had caused them discomfort at various times over the years. Their accounts were nebulous, contradictory, and patently fabricated. Yet these discrepancies seemed to matter little. The prevailing narrative was already solidified. I had been cast as the villain, and truth, however elusive, represented my only path to vindication. The sole obstacle was my continuing ignorance of what that truth actually entailed. Preston, I quickly realized within the first week, wouldn't suffice as counsel. He possessed the rudimentary competence typical of an overburdened public defender, just enough to appear, but not enough to prevail. Consequently, I sought the services of a private attorney. Her name was Morgan Elliott, and she proved to be precisely the advocate I required. Morgan possessed a razor-sharp intellect that unnerved even experienced police officers. In her late 40s, she had dedicated 2 decades to defending high-profile cases, exuding a confidence born only from triumphing when all odds were stacked against her clients. She entered our initial meeting clad in a tailored gray suit, carrying a leather folder that I suspected commanded a price tag exceeding my monthly rent. "Let's discuss what genuinely transpired," she stated, settling into the chair opposite me in her office. "No superficial pleasantries, no empty condolences, just down to business. And I mean genuinely transpired, not your perception of events, not what you wished had happened, but the actual, unvarnished timeline." I relayed the entire account once more, but this time I focused on intricacies I had previously overlooked. The specific attire Violet wore, the precise words she uttered, her subtle body language, and the exact moments various individuals arrived. Morgan listened intently, making no notes. Upon my conclusion, she leaned back in her chair. "She's safeguarding something," Morgan declared flatly. "This isn't about you directly. This is driven by fear. It's someone who feels cornered and is employing the only weapon she believes will be effective." "That's precisely what I've been contemplating," I admitted. "But what? What could she be protecting that warrants the demolition of someone's life?" "That," Morgan asserted, opening her folder, "is precisely what we are going to uncover." Inside, an array of evidence lay before me. Photographs, stills from security footage, various documents. I've already initiated the process of pulling records. Violet married Dominic 8 years ago. Prior to that, she resided in 3 distinct cities over the span of 4 years. This isn't typical relocation patterns. This suggests either an escape from something or a deliberate pursuit of something. She presented the photographs to me. Violet at charitable galas, Violet at exclusive parties, Violet alongside various individuals I didn't recognize. In each image, that same piercing, calculated expression adorned her face. "What about her family?" I inquired. "Her mother passed away when she was 12, Morgan explained. Her father is a retired financial advisor. They share a close bond, but he's largely withdrawn from her immediate life, residing overseas." Morgan continued to sift through additional documents, but here's where it becomes particularly intriguing. Approximately 15 years ago, Violet's father was implicated in some questionable business dealings. Nothing overtly criminal, but verging on it. Securities violations, regulatory infractions. settlements with the SEC. Why would that be relevant now? I probed. It's relevant, Morgan stated, producing a bank statement, because of this. Dominic's business has been struggling, not overtly, not publicly, but the financial figures are undeniable. He's been losing substantial amounts of money for the past 2 years, and there's a series of considerable payments being made to accounts registered overseas. I scrutinized the statement. The figures were in the millions, consistently transferred on a monthly basis with monotonous regularity. What is he paying for? I asked. That, Morgan replied, is the central question, and my suspicion is that Violet possesses knowledge of this, which explains her need to eliminate you. You were too proximate, too discerning. Perhaps you inadvertently observed something, or perhaps she simply recognized you were the kind of individual who would eventually perceive that something was amiss. Over the subsequent 2 weeks, Morgan's investigators delved deeper, unearthing inconsistencies within Violet's statement. These were minor details initially. She had asserted that I made physical contact with her around 7:45 a.m., yet security footage clearly showed her entering the office at 7:48 a.m. She claimed I had made unwanted advances repeatedly over the years, but then failed to recall a single specific instance. She alleged that 3 witnesses overheard her crying for me to stop, but when Morgan privately interviewed these individuals, their stories began to unravel. One witness, a junior associate named Paige, eventually confessed under pressure that she had not actually been in the office at the time of the alleged incident. She had merely heard Violet's screams and, like everyone else, had assumed the worst. Another witness, a security guard named Hunter, became notably less certain about what he had witnessed. When Morgan presented him with the security footage and highlighted the chronological discrepancies, he appeared visibly uncomfortable. Hunter finally admitted. The third witness never responded to Morgan's requests for an interview, but her investigator uncovered the reason. 2 days after submitting her statement corroborating Violet's account, she received a bank transfer for $50,000, disguised as a gift from an anonymous account. When Morgan traced the funds, they originated from a shell corporation registered to one of Dominic's business associates. It was then that Morgan summoned me back to her office, a stack of financial records in hand. Your boss is bribing witnesses, Morgan stated unequivocally, which signifies his awareness that Violet is fabricating her story, and therefore he is complicit in this scheme. The room seemed to momentarily list. I had worked for Dominic for 5 years, a period during which I had respected him, and all that time he was actively paying individuals to substantiate a lie that would utterly destroy me. Why would he do that? I questioned, even though a part of me already intuited the answer. Because whatever is transpiring with his finances is more detrimental than a mere sexual assault accusation, Morgan explained. And he requires you to be completely discredited, so that anything you might potentially divulge about his business affairs is dismissed as the desperate ramblings of a man attempting to salvage himself. Morgan subsequently filed a motion to dismiss the charges, citing witness tampering. She submitted the incriminating bank records as compelling evidence. She vehemently challenged the credibility of every individual who had testified against me, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, the case began to fracture. The prosecutor, a woman named Fiona, initially adopted an aggressive stance. However, once she realized that Dominic's team had been actively engaged in bribing witnesses, she understood the profound issue at hand. Her case was not merely weak, it was irreparably tainted. 2 months following my arrest, the charges were reduced from felony assault to misdemeanor indecent conduct. Morgan immediately rejected the proposed plea bargain. We are not settling for anything whatsoever, she informed me. We will relentlessly fight this until it results in an outright dismissal or an acquittal, because if we accept a reduced charge, it will permanently stain your record, and that, precisely, is their objective. They want you branded. They want you damaged. Yet there was something Morgan withheld from me until later. The extensive investigation into Violet's false accusation had unearthed a far more significant development, a revelation that was poised to blow the entire case wide open in ways no one had foreseen. It was a truth intricately linked to Dominic's financial dealings, the destinations of his money, and the true identities of those he was illicitly paying to maintain their silence. Morgan contacted me on a Friday afternoon. Her voice was markedly different, taut, as if she were wrestling to contain something on the verge of erupting. "We've uncovered something significant," she declared. "I need you to come to my office, immediately." Upon my arrival, Morgan was pacing restlessly. Her investigator, a taciturn man named Quentin, sat at the conference table, his laptop open. Displayed on the screen were photographs of financial transactions, bank records, flight manifests, and something else, something that sent a chill through my very core. Military records. My military records. "Why do you possess those?" I demanded. "Because Violet specifically requested them," Morgan explained. "During the discovery phase, she sought your complete service file, and when I pressed her legal team for the rationale behind needing documentation spanning from 1993 to 2005, a period from 12 years ago, they offered no explanation. But Quentin delved deeper." Quentin then swiveled the laptop screen towards me. On display was a photograph of a woman in her early 50s, possessing distinct Middle Eastern features. She stood beside a man I recognized from news reports, a man named Khaled, who had been implicated in organized crime activities across 3 continents. "This is Amara Khaled," Quentin stated quietly. "She is Violet's biological mother, not the woman who raised her, but the woman who gave birth to her." I stared, bewildered at the photograph. Nothing, absolutely nothing, made any sense. When Violet was just 12 years old, her biological mother passed away. I had mentioned that I believed her adoptive mother had died, but Morgan provided a crucial correction. While her biological mother was, in fact, still alive, she was deeply enmeshed in money laundering activities for a college organization. The room seemed to sway around me again. I instinctively reached for a chair and lowered myself into it. Violet, whose birth name was Amara College Jr., Quentin explained, pulling up further documentation, was born into this very environment. However, when Violet turned 8, her mother, Amara, struck an agreement. She became a state's witness against Khaled's organization. In return, both she and her daughter were placed under witness protection, receiving new names, new identities, and new lives. So I began. "Violet is in witness protection." Morgan completed my thought. "And Dominic was entirely unaware, or at least he didn't know at the time of their marriage. But someone discovered her secret, someone who knew her true identity, and that individual has been exploiting this knowledge to blackmail your boss for the past 2 years. The financial transfers, the millions of dollars systematically leaving Dominic's accounts each month, it suddenly all made perfect sense. Dominic has been paying someone to safeguard Violet's identity," I concluded. "Precisely," Morgan affirmed. "And when you were promoted to a more senior position in his office, gaining access to more sensitive information and spending increased time with his family, Violet became anxious. She feared you might uncover the truth, or worse, she worried Dominic might reveal it to you. So she decided to neutralize you as a threat." "By accusing me of rape," I stated flatly. "By orchestrating a scenario where you would be so compromised, so discredited, so preoccupied with navigating a legal quagmire that you would be incapable of unearthing her secrets," Morgan elaborated. "Or even if you did learn them, no one would ever believe a word you said." I sat there, absorbing this revelation. The fabrication wasn't random. It was a strategically calculated move by someone who thoroughly understood how to weaponize the legal system. But there's more. Violet didn't just want you gone. She wanted to ensure you couldn't discuss anything you might have discovered, which implies she knew what you knew, or what you might know. "I didn't know anything," I protested. "I had no inkling about her background." "But you had access to Dominic's financial records," Quentin interjected, pointing to another document. "As his executive assistant, you processed some of his business transactions. Nothing overtly unusual, but 6 months ago, you flagged one of his accounts for review because the activity pattern seemed, well, off. You didn't understand why, you just found it peculiar. You were right to be suspicious. That account was an integral part of the blackmail payment system, and Violet knew you had scrutinized it. She feared what you might eventually piece together, so she destroyed me to protect her secret. Yes, but here's where this becomes dangerous for her. When we unearthed her background through the discovery process, we also uncovered something else. The individual blackmailing Dominic. We have a name, and that name connects to something far larger than just Violet's identity. Morgan produced another file, inside which was surveillance footage. It showed Dominic meeting a man in a parking garage, the man handing him a thick, cash-filled envelope. That's Marcus, Quinton identified, pointing to the man. Marcus Ashford, Violet's uncle, her biological uncle through her mother's side. He's a fixer. He works for organizations that need people to vanish, blackmail situations to be managed, and loose ends tied up. He's been blackmailing his own niece's husband, I observed. He's been blackmailing Dominic to protect his niece, Morgan corrected me. And when Violet grew anxious about you, she likely informed her uncle. He then decided the simplest solution was to make you disappear. But he couldn't act directly, so he allowed Violet to do it for him. He let her frame you. He let the system do the work. I rose and walked to the window. From Morgan's office, the city stretched out below. Millions of people, millions of lives. And somewhere within that city, Violet Ashford, or Amara Jr., or whatever her actual name was probably feeling a sense of relief, likely believing she had triumphed. What do we do? I asked. We have options, Morgan replied. We can use this information to get the charges against you dismissed. We can fully expose Violet's background and obliterate her credibility. We can hand over evidence of blackmail and organized crime connections to the FBI. Or, I prompted, detecting a subtle hesitation in her tone. Or, Morgan said slowly, we can use this information as leverage. We can guarantee that what happened to you never happens again. We can ensure Dominic faces real consequences. And we can make certain Marcus understands that interfering with innocent people comes at a cost. That's not justice, I asserted. That's revenge. No, Morgan countered. Justice would be leaving you ruined while people like Violet and Marcus walk free. Revenge would be destroying them. What I'm suggesting is something different. It's power. It's ensuring they comprehend the gravity of their actions. It's guaranteeing they can't repeat them. I turned away from the window. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a choice. I could pursue the easy path and simply reclaim my life, or I could choose something more challenging, something that would fundamentally alter everything. Tell me the plan, I said. Morgan's smile was not warm, but sharp. First, we file a countersuit against Violet for false accusation and malicious prosecution. Then we subpoena Marcus's financial records. And then we make them understand that lying about a Navy SEAL has consequences they never imagined. The countersuit landed like a seismic shockwave. Morgan filed it on a Monday morning. By noon, every lawyer associated with Violet's team was in a state of panic. Because once we filed, we gained the right to subpoena everything. Her phone records, her emails, her financial transactions, everything. Violet's legal team attempted to block the subpoenas, arguing that her background was sealed and protected by the Witness Protection Program. But Morgan was prepared. She had already contacted the federal prosecutors who had initially handled Violet's mother's case, and those prosecutors understood one thing absolutely clearly. Violet had initiated a false criminal accusation. That constituted a crime, and it had drawn federal attention to a sealed case. In any event, the feds were displeased. Within a week, I received a call from a federal agent named Oliver. He wanted to meet, just me, no lawyer. Not yet. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Oliver, in his 50s, looked worn, with eyes that had seen too much. He ordered black coffee and immediately got down to brass tacks. Here's what we know, Oliver stated, skipping any pleasantries. Violet Khaled, because that's her real name, was born into a criminal organization. Her mother became a state's witness. We placed both of them in protection. Violet has lived cleanly since then. No arrests, no involvement in anything illegal. But she lied about you, and that changes things. What things? I inquired. It means she's willing to commit federal crimes to protect her identity, Oliver explained, which indicates she's not as committed to staying clean as we initially believed, which means we need to understand what she's truly protecting. Because if she's willing to falsely accuse someone, what else is she willing to do? Her uncle, I said. Marcus. He's been blackmailing Dominic. Oliver nodded as if he already knew. Marcus is a problem we've been monitoring for 7 years, Oliver said. He works for organizations involved in information trafficking, blackmail, and occasionally worse. We've never been able to pin anything on him that would stick. But now, with your case, we have leverage. We're going to use it. How? I asked. By making a deal, Oliver replied. You cooperate with our investigation. You help us comprehend the blackmail scheme and how Violet's identity became a tool for extortion. And in exchange, the false accusation charges against you disappear completely.
Federal intervention. No record. You walk clean.
What about Violet? What about Dominic? I pressed. That's between us and them, Oliver said. But I'll tell you this, anyone who helps us will get a deal. Anyone who doesn't, won't. 2 days later, Dominic's lawyer contacted Morgan. He wanted to negotiate, not with me, but with the federal investigators. Dominic was prepared to provide full documentation of every blackmail payment, every threat, every interaction with Marcus, everything. In return, he sought immunity from prosecution for being an accomplice in the false accusation. He asserted he didn't know Violet was lying. He claimed Marcus had threatened his family. He claimed he was a victim. But the emails told a different story. Quentin's team had discovered correspondence between Dominic and Violet, emails discussing strategy, emails where Dominic explicitly instructed Violet to make the accusation, emails where he promised her that his legal team would demolish my credibility, leaving me defenseless. When Oliver showed me those emails, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. I had moved beyond anger. It was clarity. Dominic had masterminded this entire situation. Violet had been his instrument, but he had been the architect. He's going to face charges, Oliver informed me. Conspiracy, suborning perjury, perhaps more. His immunity offer is off the table. Violet's team attempted a different approach. They filed a motion claiming that her testimony and actions were protected because she was acting under duress, because Marcus had threatened her, because she was afraid. But the evidence did not support that. The emails showed her volunteering the idea. The emails showed her excited about it. The electronic communications revealed her clear enjoyment in devastating another person's existence. The federal prosecutor, Natalie, a woman endowed with perceptive eyes and even keener judgment, saw through the charade with absolute clarity, understanding Violet's true intentions. During a discussion at the federal courthouse, Natalie confided in me, stating that Violet made a calculated choice to destroy you, and now she's trying to rewrite the narrative to make herself the victim. It won't work. The subsequent plea bargain presented was unsparing. Violet faced a difficult choice. Either proceed to trial on multiple charges, including filing a false report, conspiracy, and malicious prosecution, or accept a deal. This agreement entailed confessing guilt and serving a federal sentence, not an extensive period, perhaps 18 months in a minimum security facility, but it guaranteed a felony record. Crucially, it necessitated a public admission of her deception. Her legal team contested the terms for weeks, arguing that her identity remained vulnerable, that public exposure would reveal her past, and that prison time was excessive for a false accusation. However, these points quickly became irrelevant once federal authorities became involved, irrevocably exposing Violet's secrets. Although courtroom proceedings were sealed, the facts had already become public. Violet Collette, born into a criminal family, subsequently protected by the government, now faced federal charges for misusing that very protection. The day before the trial was scheduled to begin, Violet's lawyer contacted Morgan with an update. Violet was accepting the plea deal. She would plead guilty, serve her time, and issue a public apology acknowledging the falsity of the sexual assault accusation. The precise motivation for her change of heart remained unclear: fear of trial, fear of imprisonment, or fear of her entire life being laid bare in open court. Whatever the reason, she finally grasped that her fabricated story had reached its inevitable end. On the day she entered her guilty plea, I was present in the courtroom. My attendance wasn't mandatory, yet I felt a compelling need to be there, to witness her admission, to hear those words spoken by her. When the judge questioned her understanding of the charges and their repercussions, Violet's voice was barely audible, fractured, utterly unlike the sharp, calculating individual who had screamed in that office months prior. "I do," she affirmed. "And you're entering a guilty plea?" the judge inquired. "Yes," Violet responded. "I falsely accused Adrian Cole of sexual assault. It wasn't true. It was never true. I did it to protect myself. And I'm sorry." Those final 3 words, "I'm sorry," offered no rectification. They did not restore the months of my life that had been shattered, nor did they erase the public humiliation, the pervasive fear, or the many nights I spent plagued by uncertainty about potentially ending up in prison for a crime I never committed. Yet they represented an acknowledgement, a dismantling of the lie. And sometimes one must recognize that such an acknowledgement is the most one can receive. The day following Violet's plea, the federal investigation into Dominic's finances became public knowledge, not by choice, but out of necessity. With the plea deal finalized, the government no longer had any incentive to maintain secrecy, and protecting Dominic's reputation was clearly not a priority. The headlines were scathing. Quote 0, quote 1, quote 2. Yet another detail in those headlines captured my attention, a revelation far more significant than Violet's deception, which illuminated Dominic's initial desperation. The funds he had been paying were not merely for blackmail. They were part of an embezzlement scheme. Federal investigators had traced the money back to his company's pension fund, money belonging to hundreds of employees, which Dominic had been systematically pilfering and siphoning through shell corporations. The total amounted to $47 million. Upon reading that figure, everything coalesced. Violet's accusation wasn't simply about safeguarding her secret. It was about buying time, about keeping me diverted and discredited while Dominic transferred funds and obliterated evidence. It was about leveraging a false accusation against me to create a maelstrom that would conceal a far more substantial crime. Morgan contacted me that afternoon. "They're pursuing Dominic with everything they've got," she stated. "Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and now conspiracy to commit perjury and file a false accusation. He's facing a minimum of 25 years. "What about his company?" I inquired. "Dissolved. His assets are frozen. The pension fund is being replenished from his personal holdings, but most of his wealth is entangled in the business. Employees who lost their pensions will likely recover only about 50 cents on the dollar." I reflected on the hundreds of individuals who worked for Dominic's company, people who had trusted him, who had dedicated years to him, believing their retirement was secure. He had stolen from them, seized their financial futures, and either squandered it or stashed it in offshore accounts. And then he had attempted to ruin me to safeguard that secret. 2 weeks later, I received a subpoena to testify, not as a victim, but as a witness. Federal prosecutors sought my detailed account of every financial transaction I had processed for Dominic, every inconsistency I had noted, every detail that had seemed amiss. I spent 3 days preparing with Natalie, the federal prosecutor. We meticulously reviewed hundreds of documents, transactions, and communications. She was meticulously building a case demonstrating that Dominic had systematically defrauded his company for years, that he had exploited Violet's blackmail situation to hasten the theft, and that, upon realizing I might begin to question things, he had orchestrated the false accusation to neutralize me as a threat. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. However, prior to that, an unforeseen development occurred. Marcus, Violet's uncle, vanished. One day, he was in a federal holding cell awaiting trial on blackmail charges. The next, he was gone, though not escaped. The prison confirmed he had been transferred. To where? They refused to say. Federal agencies became involved, questions were raised, but no one offered answers. Oliver personally called me. "Marcus is in protective custody," he informed me. "We moved him." "Why?" I asked. "Because he was going to be killed in that holding cell," Oliver stated plainly. "He owed money to people, dangerous people, and they wanted him silenced. So we moved him to a secure facility. We're using him as a witness against higher-level operators. In exchange, he disappears into the system." "So he's getting away with it?" I challenged. "No," Oliver corrected. "He's going to spend the rest of his life in protective custody. He'll never walk free again, never see daylight, never have a normal life. That's not getting away with it. That's just a different kind of prison." 2 months before Dominic's trial, his legal team made a final overture, approaching Morgan with an offer. Dominic would plead guilty to the financial crimes, cooperate fully with federal investigators, and accept prison time. In return, the charges connected to the false accusation against me would be reduced. He would serve his sentence, but avoid the conspiracy counts. Morgan presented the offer to me. "It's your decision," she said. "You can accept it and know he'll spend perhaps 10 years in prison for the embezzlement, or you can reject it and let the case proceed to trial. If we win, he'll face 25 years. If we lose..." She left the sentence unfinished. I mulled it over for a considerable time. I contemplated the anger I should have felt, the rage, the desire for maximum retribution. But what I actually experienced was something different. Exhaustion, a sense of emptiness. "Let him take the deal," I eventually stated. "But only if he has to publicly admit under oath that he orchestrated the false accusation against me. I want it clearly on the record. I want it unequivocally clear to everyone that he lied." Morgan smiled. "I can make that happen," she assured me. 3 weeks later, Dominic stood in federal court and confessed. He admitted to having asked Violet to make the false accusation, acknowledged instructing his legal team to demolish my reputation, and conceded that he had done so to divert attention from the pension fund theft. The judge then sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. As Dominic was being led away, his glance met mine for a fleeting second, and in that moment I observed something entirely unexpected. A man who, at last, comprehended that he had lost everything, not due to my actions, but entirely because of his own. The courtroom was hushed, save for the distinct clinking of Dominic's chains as he was escorted out. That evening, my name resurfaced in the news, but this time not as the accused. It was as the man who had outlived the deception, the Navy SEAL who had been targeted by his own supervisor and had remained unbroken. Dozens of media outlets requested interviews, and publishers vied for book deals. Everyone wanted to know how it felt, but I had no desire to discuss it, no wish to relive it. I simply wanted to move on. What I didn't yet realize was that moving forward necessitated confronting an even greater challenge than the trial itself. It meant grappling with the profound internal impact of all that had transpired, understanding that despite truth's triumph, I still bore the heavy burden of the lie. And that weight, I was soon to discover, was far from being fully lifted. 6 weeks after Dominic's sentencing, I was summoned back to federal court, not for a trial, but for a hearing. Oliver remained tight-lipped about the reason, simply stating that my presence was required. Upon my arrival, Natalie awaited me in a conference room. She seemed altered, not weary, but rather angered. "We found something," she divulged, "and I wanted you to hear it directly from me before it goes public." She opened a laptop. The screen displayed a bank account, not just any account, but a personal one registered in Dominic's name. Yet there was another crucial detail. A co-signer, someone with equal access and authority. The name on the account read, Dominic Ashford
and Felix Morrison. Felix? I questioned. The name was unfamiliar to me. Felix Morrison, Natalie articulated slowly. Dominic's business associate was the individual responsible for overseeing the daily operations of his firm. I recalled Felix. I had met him on several occasions.
He was a slender man in his 60s, with silver hair and tailored suits, always maintaining a quiet presence in meetings, seemingly in the background. "What about him?" I inquired. Natalie clarified. "He's more than just a partner. He's the mastermind behind the entire embezzlement scheme. Dominic was merely the figurehead. Felix was the true orchestrator. And it stretches back far longer than we initially believed. 15 years, predating your employment with Dominic." Natalie then presented additional documentation, financial records, internal communications, an intricate web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. "Felix has been siphoning money through Dominic's company for a decade and a half," Natalie continued. "However, it's not exclusively embezzlement. We've traced certain money flows, some of which link to organized crime, others to political corruption, and some to activities for which we don't even have names yet." "Why are you disclosing this to me?" I questioned. "Because when we attempted to apprehend Felix, he was gone," Natalie stated, explaining that he had fled the country. "We have federal agents stationed at airports, and Interpol is involved, but as of now, his whereabouts are unknown." The room seemed to whirl around me. Throughout this entire ordeal, I had presumed Dominic to be the criminal genius, only to discover he was a mere puppet, with someone else manipulating the strings all along. "There's more," Natalie added, her voice now tinged with frustration rather than anger. "When we reviewed Felix's communications, we discovered emails between him and someone else, an individual with whom he was collaborating to ensure certain information remained concealed." "Who?" I pressed. Natalie hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in the prosecutor's demeanor for the first time since I had known her. Natalie quietly revealed. My stomach plummeted. I exclaimed. Natalie explained that they were exploiting Violet's background, specifically her ties to organized crime through her biological mother, as leverage. They were divulging information regarding witness protection protocols to Felix's criminal associates, selling secrets that could jeopardize those within the program. "Violet was a part of this?" I asked, horrified. "We don't believe so," Natalie responded. "At least, not intentionally. We suspect her father was using her, capitalizing on the fact that she was adopted and possessed sensitive knowledge about the protection program. But when you began inquiring about Dominic's finances, Felix became anxious. He informed Violet's father, who then instructed Violet to take drastic measures to distance you from the situation." The wave of betrayal washed over me. I had been ensnared in something far more intricate than I had ever comprehended. This wasn't merely about Dominic's theft or Violet's secret. It was about an expansive network of corruption spanning multiple agencies, continents, and organizations. "What happens next?" I inquired. "Now we locate Felix," Natalie declared, "and we safeguard the individuals in witness protection whose information he may have compromised. Additionally, we face a difficult decision regarding Violet." "What decision?" I asked. "Violet's father is under investigation for selling information to criminals, which complicates Violet's situation. She remains under protection, but her family now poses a security risk. We must decide whether to relocate her, change her identity again, or—" Natalie paused. "Or whether she becomes a witness against her own father." 2 days later, Violet called me. Her voice was markedly different, not calculated or sharp, but broken. "I didn't know," she immediately stated. "I need you to understand that. I didn't know what my father was doing. I didn't know he was selling information." "I didn't know any of it." "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because the federal prosecutors said I could," Violet replied. "And because I need to tell you something. I need to explain why I did it, why I accused you." Despite my reluctance, I listened. "My father called me that morning," Violet recounted. "He told me that someone had been delving into our family's finances. He said you had been digging, that you had questions. He was panicked. He told me I needed to do something to make you disappear, to discredit you. He said if I didn't, we would all be exposed." "So you destroyed me," I stated flatly. "I panicked," Violet insisted. "I was terrified. I had spent my entire life concealing who I was, and suddenly it felt like everything was on the verge of collapse. My father made it sound like you were a threat, like you were going to expose us, and I believed him." "He was right," I interjected. "I would have exposed you because your father was committing crimes." "I know that now," Violet said. "The federal prosecutors explained it to me. My father wasn't trying to protect our family. He was trying to protect himself. He was using me as a shield, and when that didn't work, he disappeared." "Where is he?" I inquired. "I don't know," Violet admitted. "The last communication from him was 2 days after I accused you. He told me to stay strong and not to speak to anyone. Then he vanished." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, a realization dawning on me that I had been avoiding for months. The system had failed me not once, but twice. First, when Violet had lied, and again when those entrusted with my protection had nearly allowed an innocent man to be imprisoned. Yet, more profoundly, I understood that everyone around me had been ensnared. Violet was trapped by her father's transgressions. Dominic was caught in Felix's elaborate scheme. Felix, in turn, was evading the repercussions of his own actions. Even Marcus, Violet's uncle, was confined to protective custody. We had all been entangled in a web we scarcely comprehended. The only distinction was that I had emerged intact. I hadn't broken. I hadn't confessed to something I didn't do. I hadn't become an accomplice to the falsehoods. That night, Oliver called. "We found Felix," he announced. "In Brazil. We're working on extradition." "What about Violet's father?" I asked. "Still looking," Oliver replied. "But Adrian, I wanted you to know something. When this is all over, when all the trials are concluded and all the convictions are final, you should understand that your military training saved you. Most people would have fractured under that kind of pressure. Most people would have confessed to anything just to make it cease, but you didn't. You remained steadfast. You remained truthful. That matters." After he hung up, I reflected on Oliver's words about maintaining composure, about upholding honesty, about not breaking even when every aspect of your environment is designed to shatter you. I had survived, but survival, I was learning, was far from healing. The media storm erupted 3 months later, all at once. Every news outlet, every newspaper, every investigative journalist tracking the case suddenly gained access to strategically leaked, classified details from the federal government. The headline was unavoidable. Multi-million-dollar corruption network exposed. Real estate executive, federal employee among those charged. But what truly ignited the story was a revelation extending beyond just Dominic and Felix. The investigation had uncovered that Violet's adoptive father, a man named Grant, had been selling witness protection information to organized crime networks for over a decade. He had compromised at least 7 protected witnesses, 2 of whom were now deceased. The story spiraled. News networks brought in experts, analysts dissected the financial flows, reporters delved into family histories. Violet's dual identity became public knowledge. Her biological connection to organized crime became tabloid fodder. Her false accusation against me became the lens through which the entire scandal was viewed. And suddenly, I was everywhere. My face appeared in every news cycle. Every analysis mentioned me. I was the Navy SEAL falsely accused. I was the innocent man caught in the corruption web. I was the sympathetic protagonist in a story that had become national news. However, being the protagonist in someone else's narrative is not synonymous with freedom. My apartment became uninhabitable. Journalists encamped outside. Every time I ventured out for groceries, someone recognized me. Some individuals wanted to shake my hand. and commend my bravery. Others wanted to know if I intended to sue. Everyone seemed to want something from me. Morgan called and strongly suggested I leave the city. She had settled my case with Dominic's company. They were paying me a substantial settlement, compensation for lost wages, legal fees, and emotional distress. The sum was in the millions, enough to transform my life, enough to never have to work again. Yet it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like restitution for something that simply could not be compensated. I rented a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours away from the city, seeking minimal contact with anyone. All I desired was silence and space to process the cascade of events. It was there that the breakdown occurred. It began subtly. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations, meticulously analyzing missed moments, pondering what I could have done differently. I had endured the accusation, survived the trial, and navigated the media circus, but I couldn't endure the quiet. One night, I sat on the cabin porch and recognized a dark process unfolding within me. I was thinking of Violet, not with anger, but with something far worse. The understanding that her life was irrevocably destroyed. Violet's identity had been exposed. Her career was over. Her marriage to Dominic had culminated in divorce. She had served her federal time and been released, but she would carry this weight for the remainder of her life. And Felix had been extradited and was facing 40 years in prison. He had constructed a comfortable existence on a foundation of corruption, and now it was gone. Even for Dominic, regardless of his culpability, a part of me recognized his status as a casualty of Felix's intricate machinations. He had succumbed to manipulation, mirroring my own experience. I came to grasp that true justice, genuine vindication, does not confer a sense of triumph. Instead, it leaves everyone feeling diminished. Morgan arrived at the cabin to check on my well-being, discovering me seated in the darkness, motionless, absently gazing into the void. "You need to converse with someone," she stated without preamble. "A therapist, a counselor, anyone." I responded, "I have no desire to speak. I merely wish to forget." Morgan countered, "Forgetting is not an option, so you might as well begin processing it." I sought out a therapist named Dr. Ryder, an older gentleman, likely in his 70s, who had dedicated decades to working with veterans. His understanding of trauma surpassed that of most civilians. He comprehended the essence of enduring an experience designed to obliterate one's spirit. Dr. Ryder informed me during our initial session, "The challenge with surviving injustice is that mere survival does not erase what transpired. Your body remembers, your mind remembers, and you must decide how to contend with that memory." Over the ensuing months, I navigated through the trauma, not by suppressing it, but by cultivating understanding. By accepting that the events were neither my fault nor my responsibility to remedy. 6 months after departing the city, I reached a significant decision. I would break my silence. I intended to publicly address the events that had transpired, not for vengeance or sympathy, but as a cautionary tale. My aim was to enlighten others, to illustrate that false accusations are potent weapons, that the legal system can be compromised, and that innocent individuals can be shattered by deceit. I granted an interview to a prominent news outlet, recounting the entire narrative from the moment Violet entered Dominic's office to the profound realization of her motivations. I articulated the fear, the humiliation, the erosion of my identity. I spoke of the abrupt annihilation of one's reputation. However, I also addressed a different aspect, the individuals who had contributed to my downfall, and I spoke of them with empathy. Violet was a victim, I asserted in the interview, ensnared by her circumstances and manipulated by those she held in trust. Dominic was also a victim, trapped between his avarice and the machinations of his associates. I added, "While none of this absolves them of their actions against me, it offers an explanation." The interviewer appeared taken aback by my response. Most expected me to express rage, to demand maximum retribution, to be consumed by animosity. Yet I had gleaned a crucial lesson during those tranquil months in the cabin. Hatred harms only its possessor, never its object. Following the broadcast of the interview, a palpable shift occurred. The national discourse surrounding my case evolved, moving beyond retribution towards understanding. People began posing more incisive questions about the legal system's near failure, the facile targeting of an innocent individual, and the weaponization of protective systems. Violet contacted me, expressing a desire to apologize in person. Though I initially hesitated, Dr. Ryder encouraged me to proceed. We met in a public setting, a coffee shop. Violet's appearance differed markedly from her courtroom persona. She seemed smaller, older, as if the burden of the lie had aged her. Violet uttered softly. I replied. She rejoined. Violet stated. I conceded. Violet wept, not dramatically, but subtly, like someone who had finally ceased evading the consequences of her past. As we departed the coffee shop, Violet posed a single question. Quote 7. After honest deliberation, I responded, I don't know, but I think I can forgive what transpired. I believe I can accept it as an integral part of my narrative without allowing it to define me.
And perhaps that is sufficient.
A year passed, then another. The legal process had concluded. Dominic was serving his 15-year sentence in a federal prison upstate. Felix had been extradited and faced 40 years. Violet, having completed her sentence, had relocated to another state to forge a new life under a different identity. Grant, Violet's adoptive father, remained at large, having vanished into the protective network that had shielded him. Justice, if it could be termed such, had been rendered. Yet I was progressively realizing that authentic healing transcended courtrooms and verdicts. True healing manifested in quiet moments, in the mornings when I awoke without the immediate intrusion of Violet's scream, in the evenings when I could drive past a coffee shop without recalling the moment I understood my boss had engineered my ruin. I had permanently left the city, purchasing a modest house on the periphery of a rural area, far removed from all that reminded me of my losses. I was not in hiding, but rather reclaiming my life in a manner that resonated with me. Dr. Ryder's words during one of our final sessions resonated deeply. You survived because you did not compromise your own moral compass. Even when the system attempted to coerce a confession, even when your boss sought to destroy you, even when deceit surrounded you, you remained steadfast to your principles. That is not merely survival. That is integrity. I often reflected on this insight. I began volunteering with a veterans organization, assisting others who had returned from combat and struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. It felt appropriate, a transformation of what had sought to dismantle me into a means of aiding others. Approximately 18 months after everything had culminated, I received a letter. The return address indicated a federal prison. Though I almost discarded it, I opened it. It was from Dominic. The letter was handwritten, his script noticeably different from my memory, more erratic, less controlled. Adrian, it began. I have been here for 18 months, with 26 more years ahead. I spend most of my time contemplating the decisions I made, how each led to the next, how a single choice to embezzle money ultimately led to me instructing my wife to falsely accuse you of rape. I want you to understand that I was not thinking clearly. I was not rational. I was desperate, stupid, and willing to destroy an innocent person to save myself. You were loyal to me. You worked diligently. You sought nothing beyond performing your job well. And I repaid that loyalty by attempting to destroy you. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even expect you to care about this letter. But I needed to convey that I now comprehend my actions. And I am sorry. Dominic. I reread the letter 3 times before setting it aside. I did not reply. There was no need. Dominic's apology was not for me. It was for himself, an integral part of his personal healing journey. But I understood it, and that understanding proved sufficient. Meanwhile, Felix remained in a maximum security prison, tirelessly battling extradition appeals. His case progressed slowly through the courts. He claimed to have merely followed Dominic's directives, asserting his role as a mere employee, not the architect of any scheme. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Financial records, communications, and testimonies from his former associates. Felix faced a lengthy prison sentence. And then there was Marcus, Violet's uncle, who remained in protective custody, residing in a secure federal facility isolated from external contact. His life had essentially concluded the moment he embraced criminality, having exchanged his freedom for the illusion of power. When that illusion inevitably shattered, nothing remained. I occasionally considered Marcus, how his choices had cascaded through countless lives, how his blackmail plot had triggered the entire sequence of events, how one individual's decision to commit a crime had initiated a chain reaction affecting dozens of people. This realization imparted a significant understanding. Betrayal is not always born of grand designs and calculated maneuvers. Sometimes it stems from seemingly insignificant choices, minor decisions to deceive, small decisions to prioritize oneself over others, trivial compromises of integrity. These small decisions accumulate until they culminate in catastrophic consequences. On the 2-year anniversary of Violet's accusation, I sat on my porch, reflecting on the totality of what had transpired. I had lost my employment. I had temporarily lost my reputation. I had lost my sense of security within the system. Yet I had also gained something invaluable. I had attained clarity about my identity. I had acquired the knowledge that I possessed the resilience to survive betrayal. I had achieved the understanding that integrity holds paramount importance. The 56 missed calls that had ignited this nightmare had long since faded into memory. However, they had transformed into a potent symbol. They represented panic. They represented fear. They represented the precise moment when everything I perceived as stable abruptly became unstable. But I had endured, and that endurance had taught me that stability is not an external attribute. It is not contingent upon your job, your reputation, or your circumstances. Stability is an internal state. It is rooted in knowing who you are and remaining loyal to that truth, even when everything around you seeks to dismantle it. I received occasional updates regarding the fates of all involved. Violet lived unobtrusively in another state, working for a nonprofit, endeavoring to rebuild her existence. Her biological mother, the catalyst for this entire chain of events decades prior through her state's evidence, had passed away peacefully from natural causes. In a sense, her death brought closure, as the original crime that had set everything in motion had finally reached its conclusion. Grant's disappearance remained an enigma. Federal investigators harbored theories but lacked concrete proof. He had simply vanished into whatever underworld connections he possessed. During my darkest moments, I imagined his demise. In more optimistic times, I pictured him living in constant fear, perpetually glancing over his shoulder, always aware that his transgressions would eventually catch up with him. Morgan, my lawyer, had evolved into a confidant. We would occasionally meet for coffee and discuss the case. She'd even become something of a celebrity within legal circles, having triumphed in 3 significant cases during the 2 years following mine, each involving unfounded accusations or corrupt justice systems. "You changed how I practice law," she confided during one of our meetings. "You taught me that defending innocent individuals isn't solely about winning in court. It's about holding a mirror to the system and revealing its flaws. You made me better at my job." I was at a loss for words. I hadn't intended to instruct anyone. I merely wished to survive and move forward. Yet, perhaps that's the outcome when one refuses to yield. Perhaps that's what transpires when you remain true to yourself, even when the entire world demands you confess to something you didn't do. You transform into a lesson, a symbol, proof that integrity still holds significance. 3 years had elapsed. I stood before a group of 30 high school students, participants in a legal awareness program. They wished to hear my account of being falsely accused and what it felt like to witness the very system designed to protect you attempt to destroy you instead.
I observed their young, tentative faces. Some were likely contending with their own injustices. Others probably couldn't fathom such profound systemic failure. All of them were about to gain a crucial understanding. The hardest part wasn't the accusation, I informed them. It wasn't even the trial.
The hardest part was learning to trust again, learning to believe in the goodness of a system that had tried to consume me, learning to perceive people as individuals rather than threats. A girl in the back raised her hand. "Do you ever think about revenge?" she inquired. "Like, do you ever fantasize about harming the people who hurt you?" I paused before responding, realizing the truth was intricate. "Yes," I admitted truthfully. "I did for a long time. But I learned something vital. Revenge doesn't heal you. It merely perpetuates the damage, creating more victims. So, instead of revenge, I chose something more challenging. I chose to move forward. I chose to help people. I chose to demonstrate that their attempts to define me didn't succeed." Following the presentation, a boy approached me. He seemed about 16, visibly nervous, as if he needed to confide in someone but was unsure how. "My sister was falsely accused of stealing," he whispered, "from her school, and everyone believed it. Now she won't go to school anymore, she won't leave the house, and my parents don't know how to help her." I provided him with Morgan's contact information, urging him to reach out and assuring him that his sister was not alone. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. Initially, I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to open it. It was a video, security footage, showing a man in his 60s, thin, with gray hair, walking through an airport terminal. The timestamp was from yesterday, the location, Singapore. It was Grant, Violet's adoptive father. Someone had located him and sent me the proof. The next morning, I called Oliver. "We saw it," Oliver stated before I could even speak. "Interpol is collaborating with Singaporean authorities. We're proceeding with his arrest. He's been on the run for 3 years. It's time for him to stop." 2 weeks later, Grant was extradited back to the United States. He faced charges for selling witness protection information, conspiracy, and money laundering. His trial was scheduled for 6 months out. But I didn't wait for it. I had learned my lesson about living within courtrooms and trials. I had moved on and intended to stay moved on. What I did embark on was something different. I began writing stories about betrayal, about corruption, about the consequences of systemic failure, and about individuals who survive and rebuild. My aim wasn't to incite anger, but to foster understanding, to provoke thought, and to help people recognize that justice isn't always about punishment, but about comprehension. My first book chronicled my own case, unfiltered and raw, presenting everything from my perspective. Upon its publication, it became a bestseller, not because people sought fantasy revenge, but because they yearned for truth. People desired to understand what it truly felt like. Morgan texted me when the book hit the bestseller list. "You did it. You transformed your pain into something that helps people. That's the real victory." But the most unexpected development occurred 6 months after the book's release. Violet reached out again. She had read the book and wished to collaborate with me. "I want to write my story," Violet declared when we met. "I want to explain what it was like to be entrapped by my circumstances. I want people to understand that I wasn't just a villain. I was someone who made terrible choices under impossible pressure. I want redemption, but I also want accountability." We worked on her story together for months. It was a painful endeavor for both of us, but when it was completed, it was honest, real. It depicted the complexity of her situation without offering excuses for her actions. Her book was released a year later, and something remarkable transpired. People didn't despise her. People understood her, and, more significantly, people began to perceive the entire situation differently. They saw it not as a simplistic tale of good versus evil, but as a narrative illustrating how circumstances and choices intertwine to create tragedy. Violet's book sold nearly as well as mine, and then something even more unforeseen happened. A film producer optioned both stories. They aimed to create a documentary that would present the complete story, encompassing both perspectives, both sides. The film premiered 18 months later, garnering awards and igniting conversations about witness protection, corruption, false accusations, and the legal system. It became mandatory viewing in law schools. For me, however, the most significant moment occurred during the premiere. I was seated in the theater. Violet was 3 rows behind me. Neither of us had planned to sit near each other, but after the film concluded, she came and sat beside me. We remained silent for a long time, simply sitting in the darkness of an empty theater. 2 individuals who had destroyed each other had somehow found a way to reconstruct something that wasn't quite friendship, yet wasn't quite anything else either. "I read an interview you did last week," Violet finally said, "where you talked about forgiveness." "Yeah," I replied. "You said you don't think forgiveness means forgetting," Violet continued. "You said it means accepting what happened and choosing to move forward anyway." "That's what I believe," I affirmed. "I forgive you," Violet said quietly. I turned to look at her. "For what? I didn't do anything to you." "For surviving," Violet responded. "For not breaking, for refusing to let what I did destroy you completely. I was afraid you were going to spend the rest of your life angry, and I'm glad you didn't, because if you had, that would have meant my lie won. That would have meant I destroyed you after all. But you didn't let that happen." We left the theater separately, but something had shifted. The circle was finally closing. Now, 3 years later, I manage a nonprofit organization. We assist individuals who have been falsely accused, helping them navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives.
We help them understand that surviving injustice is possible, that moving forward is possible.
Violet also works with us, handling communications and victim support. We don't work in the same room, but we labor toward the same objective. Morgan recently shared something with me. She said, "You know what the most powerful thing about your story is? It's not the accusation, it's not the trial, it's what you did after. It's that you chose to help people instead of destroy them. That's what makes people listen to you." I reflect on those 56 missed calls, and sometimes on the terror of that day. I consider how close I came to breaking, but I also consider how I survived it, how I emerged not just intact, but transformed. And now, I want to ask you something. Before this story concludes, I need to know, where are you watching from? What's your city, your country? I want to know who's listening, and more importantly, what kind of stories you want to hear next. Do you desire more narratives of betrayal, more stories of corruption? Do you prefer revenge tales where justice finally prevails? Or do you seek stories of redemption, of individuals who make mistakes and rediscover their integrity? Comment below and inform me. Tell me your city. Tell me the kind of stories that captivate you. Tell me what compels you to return for more, because I am creating content specifically for you, and your feedback is paramount. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you won't miss the next thriller, the next epic revenge story, the next jaw-dropping betrayal tale that will hold you spellbound until the very last second. I promise you this, every story I present will have a clear ending, a satisfying resolution. No loose ends, no confusion, just pure, emotionally gripping storytelling. The 56 missed calls that initiated my nightmare became my awakening. And now, years later, I understand that some of the worst experiences we endure can become the catalyst for becoming better versions of ourselves. This is where my story ends. But your story, your journey, that is just beginning. Choose wisely. Choose with integrity. Opt to embody the individual who navigates the sting of betrayal, yet emerges unscathed by bitterness. Elect to be the type of person who extends assistance to others rather than inflicting harm. For this truly defines genuine power, manifesting not as the capacity for destruction, but as the profound ability to mend.